Do we license those who are not true citizens? I'm talking about the roads. Big question.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Welcome in. It's great to have you aboard. It's been a hectic week. All the programs that we have here this week are original, meaning they're brand new for the new year, but because of some production schedule and because of really some topics that have been lengthy, meaning important for longer conversation, we're going to kind of stay focused and have been all week on specific topics and not run to the rundown and opine on all things that are crazy, even though we have to admit the last couple of days have been nuts in some ways when it comes to Donald Trump and the press conferences and the battle with the media and his battle with the intelligence agencies and the hearings that are going on in Washington and the like. And I promise you that we'll have lots of coverage and conversation about that as we go into next week, including Congressman David Cicilline, who will be here on Tuesday. So make note of that. The conversation we're going to have tonight is about whether or not we issue driver's licenses or some kind of driver permission to undocumented immigrants. Some of you will say illegal aliens. You may choose your reference if you'd like. But I think it's an important conversation, and somewhere along the line we're going to have to take a look at this from a what's in it for us point of view, as opposed to us versus them. You're going to meet our guest tonight, who is a co-author of the latest report from Roger Williams that has sponsored the new conversation. Here's a headline that appeared last week. Roger Williams University study backs driver's licenses for undocumented residents. And here's an excerpt from the report attributed to Governor Raimondo. The comprehensive analysis by the researchers confirms that issuing licenses to undocumented Rhode Islanders can improve public safety for everyone. I remain committed to addressing this important public safety issue. Hope to work with the General Assembly to provide a path. That's the governor's perspective and has been. She's got an interesting political challenge because she, you know, kind of went that direction in the campaign and then couldn't put the hammer down and hasn't. Here's Speaker Mattiello on Newsmakers a weekend and a half ago talking about how this thing is kind of dead on arrival.
If you talk to my colleagues in the House of Representatives, I think you will find that overwhelmingly they would say no, please stay away from the issue. And I think that's from the fact that they reflect the will of their constituents. So
you don't think it would have the votes?
Oh, it would not have the votes.
It's not just the speakers blocking.
Oh, no, absolutely not. If you poll that room today, I mean, absolutely, overwhelmingly would not have the votes.
Okay.
And that's because the representation in the House, and the Senate for that matter, reflects the will of the people of the state of Rhode Island.
Speaker's got a little bit of a hangover from an 87-vote victory. He's very, very reflective of what the constituents say, or what he thinks the constituents say. Deborah Gonzalez is the co-author of this report, director of the Immigration Law Clinic at Roger Williams. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Reflection on the politics of this before we get into the arguments?
I question his constituency and where he's getting his data from that the constituents don't want this. I think a lot of this is not based on facts, but just based on emotion and how people think about the issue of granting driver's licenses or driving privileges to the undocumented population in Rhode Island.
Background on you. The Immigration Law Clinic does what?
So we represent indigent immigrants who are living in Rhode Island who need representation to fight removal proceedings and or obtain lawful permanent residence.
You have private practice as well?
I do, although primarily now I work for Rhode Islanders University School of Law.
How long have you been working in this field?
So I have been an immigration attorney for about 8 years now, and before that I worked as a paralegal for over 20, so I have a long time.
An immigration attorney does what?
We advocate on behalf of our clients to seek some sort of benefit, right? Some sort of relief so that the person can live in the United States lawfully with a green card is what people call it, but it's called lawful permanent residence.
Your customer base are those who are not full citizens for the most part?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So, you know, you and I have had a radio conversation before, so you know where my disposition is. I'm more bullish on your ideas than not. But I ask these questions because there are a lot of folks who will question motive. So let's speak to that. You're in the business of serving constituents. your constituents, customers, if you will, and advising, even at the Roger Williams Law School, folks to continue to break the law? Response.
I am not predisposed to this issue just because I'm an immigration attorney. I gain no personal benefit from that, neither do my clients.
Because?
Because having a driver's license really doesn't help them gain their green card in any way.
There's a conceptual thing out there that anything that aids and abets the quality of life of those who are not legal citizens does advance status.
Absolutely not. Granting a driver's license to an undocumented individual does not grant any sort of lawful status in the United States whatsoever. None. It simply allows that individual to drive on our roads.
Some say that's semantics. If you allow them to drive on the roads, then you are giving them a privilege that citizens have. The devil's advocacy on this sometimes is difficult for me because I don't really buy this, but it is giving them a privilege that we have earned, we the citizens have earned. And so if you offer that privilege, you are extending to them something that they lawfully shouldn't have because they shouldn't be here in the first place, and then we go right back to that argument.
So I would say separate that from a public safety issue. This isn't an immigration issue. Granting driver's licenses to this undocumented population is not an immigration issue. This is a public safety issue. Do you want folks who are on the road to know how to drive? Are we helping them or giving them some privilege? I would say no. They are here. There are 30,000 undocumented people who live in the state of Rhode Island. They're not going anywhere. They're not leaving.
Yeah, we'll get more to the details of that argument in a second. Tell me why you put the report together.
So I think what we wanted, at the time that the report came out, there was some legislation that had been pending in the General Assembly in Rhode Island. There's been legislation that's been pending with the General Assembly for as long as I can remember, and since I've actually even paid attention to this issue, which is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. For me, although I know people have been arguing this issue for very many years. And so knowing that this was pending in the General Assembly, it became important for us at the university to want to put forth facts, information, data, so that the General Assembly could look at this issue with information that they need to decide, yes, we should do this in Rhode Island, no, we shouldn't do this, and these are the reasons why.
Is there legislation being written to support your presentation of this report?
Not that I know of. Today, no. There was legislation that was pending in 2016. I believe that died in committee, or whatever the term is that they use when they do that. I'm not very political.
So your work here is scholarly and not
academic in basis,
and not an effort to influence a change at the General Assembly.
No, it was merely to provide information so that informed decisions can be made.
Yet you make an argument that we should have undocumented citizens lawfully driving on the roads.
Well, that's my personal opinion, right? I believe that that is the case.
And the report
personally.
more or less goes in that direction.
It does go in that direction, but that's because the facts call for that, right? Had the facts been otherwise, we would have reported otherwise.
Explain that.
So the facts in the report state that there are benefits to granting driver's licenses to the undocumented population. Be that there are less traffic fatalities in the roads, be that people are insured, generally speaking, who have driver's licenses, be that more disposable income becomes available to people who have their driver's licenses. So if the information had been no, there is absolutely no economic gain to be had by granting driver's licenses, we would have reported that as well.
Some folks on the radio program, after you issued some of these thoughts and reflected on some of this data, would suggest that this is coincidence rather than correlation, meaning that there are other in the states where there's some permission for driving for undocumented citizens or undocumented residents, that the trends are good anyway. if the trends are good anyway and there are less fatalities and there's more safety on the roads, and that's only going to be reflective.
Well, no, the data showed that that wasn't true for states that didn't provide driver's licenses to their undocumented population.
So the states, and I think, Jess, we've got a list of the states that have some thumbs up on this, and there they are. These states, your data suggests that because of the license for the undocumented immigrant, in whatever form it's provided, has had a direct and unique effect on the data.
A positive impact on traffic accidents, a positive impact on people being insured, a positive impact on the state's economy in those states.
Okay.
And in states that didn't provide these privileges to their undocumented population, the numbers were not as high.
All right, we'll break some of that down when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
I believe every Rhode Islander driving on our roads should be driving safely, which means with a license and with insurance. My job as governor, my #1 job is to keep the people of Rhode Island safe. I think everyone driving should be doing it with a license and with insurance, because then everyone in Rhode Island will be safer on the roads.
That's Governor Raimondo over a year ago, more or less reflecting what her comments reflect in the report. She's been consistent on this, yet she has not been aggressive. And there's a difference. She's with you. She's in a position to really take the bully pulpit on this, but she hasn't. Reflection?
I don't know what to make of her lack of involvement, and I will say that, because I think that when the bill last year was pending at the General Assembly, she had an opportunity then to do something. And from what I know, she didn't. And it's very disappointing, because one of the things that she promised the Latino community when she ran was that she was going to be sure that she implemented driver's licenses to the undocumented, even if it had to be done by executive order. And then she was elected and retracted that and said she wanted to do it through the General Assembly. Personally, and I will speak only for me, I agree, right? The General Assembly is the best way to get this done. But when you made a promise that you were going to get it done, and you don't want to do it by executive order because you don't think that's the best way, I agree with that. But when there's a bill pending at the General Assembly and you do little to nothing to push that forward, it's disappointing.
Well, that's an interesting comment, because, you know, last segment you suggested that you're about the academia and not necessarily about the politics.
Well, I did say personally, right?
Yes, but well, hey, look, you know, you have every right in the world to your political opinion. I find this to be interesting, so let's expand this just a little bit more. The politics of this issue are kind of a high tension wire. I think in a lot of ways, if people think it through and start to look at the issue to their own benefit, I'm talking about citizens, they may very well come to a different conclusion. But the emotion and the drama surrounding immigration, period, certainly escalated by the Trump candidacy and now election, has only jacked this sucker to a whole nother level. So the governor's doing an equation. I mean, you obviously have figured it out. I think everybody's figured it out. This is not a hill she's ready to die on right now. She's got some other things that she has to do, and she's got a Speaker of the House who more or less is resting on the laurels of the assumption, because I don't see the data to support the assumption that this is a political suicide move.
Right. I agree.
So what do? You put out a report, you come on the shows, you make the argument. What moves this ball forward?
Legislation needs to be introduced again, but as you've just said, you know, we have a president-elect who is not in favor of, I don't want to say he's not in favor of immigrants, because I don't know that I ever heard him say that, but has a view on undocumented immigration in the United States today that is not one that will benefit that community, right? Even if a bill was, please, and let me preface this by saying this is my own personal thoughts and beliefs based on what I observe and what I hear on the news. I think even if a bill were to be introduced today at the General Assembly, I don't think that bill would pass. Not because I don't think that that the constituency wouldn't want it, but I think that we are a country so divided today based on the presidential elections that does trickle down to Rhode Island. And now that we've put this report out, I have felt that even more than I ever did before.
Why?
In the state. I noticed that people are really angry. They're unhappy with how the federal government has dealt with this issue, which is to say they haven't dealt with this issue at all. And so now I think many people feel that the state of Rhode Island, and I'm going to speak in the Rhode Island because this is where I live, that the state now needs to do something because the federal government isn't doing something. And my answer to that is no, only the federal government can do something. And granting driver's licenses to people isn't something that the state would be doing to advance anybody's lawful status at all. This is a public safety issue. Right? And this is when we say, I think a second ago you said something like, you know, how does this benefit us? This is a benefit to the rest of the citizens that live in the state of Rhode Island if we were to grant driver's licenses.
Do you need, we'll still talk about the strategy and the politics of this, and then I promise we'll get to some of these arguments in a little bit more detail in the next segment, even though we're always running short on time. Do you believe that there needs to be some kind of third-party and/or sponsoring entity that can actually bring an information campaign to the state of Rhode Island that comes off of this report, so that, I mean, your appearance here is important. You've been accessible, terrific. I'm sure you will continue to be so because you're committed to this conversation and to this outcome. But it seems to me, if we have a General Assembly that's stuck, we have a governor that doesn't want to push the pedal down, and we have a minority community, a Latino community, that has been kind of same old with the politics have been really poorly executed, and I don't think it's helped the rift that exists allegedly in the general public about all this. I don't know where the irresistible force and immovable objects changed in order to be able to bring the conversation to a light that informs people, where they say, you know what, holy boy, this could save me on my auto insurance, and/or this could make me safer on the highways.
I think the insurance companies need to come forward, right? Auto insurance companies need to come forward and advocate for this.
And what, promise that rates will be lower if the pool is larger?
I think that auto insurance should want people to have driver's licenses, because then that prevents accidents and it prevents them from having to pay money out for auto accidents that occur.
Has any of your research or discourse on this intersected with the insurance industry? I mean, do you know why they're somewhat silent here?
We don't know. In our study, I don't believe, looked at that at all. And it didn't look for it in
What's your
Rhode
gut
Island.
say?
Why they're not doing it? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I honestly have no idea. I know that AAA, through the Pew, had put out some information through the Pew research that in fact was some information that I used, and I don't want to quote on it because I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but that was a long time ago. That was some research that was done by the Pew Research Institute. So it's unclear why they're not coming forward. It's illogical to me that they wouldn't, because doesn't that benefit them to come forward and want people who are driving on the roads to have driver's licenses? Because if they have a driver's license, that means they took a test, that means they did training, that means they know how to drive on the roads, and they've purchased automobile insurance, hopefully.
You know, it dawns on me that what we need to do is bring the insurance agency in here and on the radio and ask them this question, right? All right, some of the myths about this when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. So our professor here has, I think, laid out some interesting discussion both on the data and a little bit of politics and some of the actual environment regarding the undocumented person's driver capability and, you know, what we benefit from. There's a couple of talking points here. Let's put them up to make sure that we cover some of these issues. Key findings of the report: auto insurance costs is lower, traffic fatalities are lower. Well, that's fast. Can we go back? Thank you. Poverty rates decline faster. All right. Why do poverty rates decline faster?
So our numbers showed, based on the data that's been that they looked at the Latino Policy Institute, that states wherein driver's licenses were granted offered more disposable income to the undocumented population. And so having more disposable income hopefully brings the person's status up.
By the way,
And I don't mean legal status, I mean economic status.
understand. By the way, we have a lot of undocumented people who work. Most of them work.
Yes,
A lot of them get paychecks.
yes,
A lot of them pay taxes.
yes, they do.
They have tax identification numbers
They do.
for their own businesses. And there are businesses out there who are supposed to not hire without the right kind of immigration check, but do, and then file payroll taxes anyway.
Right.
The federal government will say, you know what, they really shouldn't be here, but we'll take their taxes. And I find it on just a common sense argument, if in fact somebody is paying taxes that supports the infrastructure, why don't we license them to be on the infrastructure they pay taxes to support?
That's an absolutely good point, one that I question myself. A lot of people who are undocumented work in Rhode Island. They either...
And they're not all under the table.
No. They'll provide, they'll invent, and I have a lot of clients who say to me, well, I have a social, this is the number, and I'm like, how'd you get this number? And they'll say, I made it up. Like, they'll make up a number, and the employer takes the number because the IRS in the I-9 doesn't require them to look at the Social Security number.
That's a problem, though. You'd agree.
Well,
It's a means to an end, I
that's
guess.
that's a problem that has to do with the employer.
Gotcha. More stuff here. Policy recommendations, issue license, safer roads, costs and fees to be determined by the DMV, clear requirements, and outreach and educational campaigns. Many states have different criteria. Connecticut's pretty tough. I mean, you have to have been here for a while, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z, right?
Which, by the way, the legislation that was introduced in Rhode Island in 2016 mirrored the legislation that had been introduced in Connecticut and that actually passed, requiring proof of identity, which was by way of a passport and some other document like a birth certificate, marriage certificate, but also required proof of residency, which came by the way of 2 years of tax returns.
Is there any data that shows that because the state said yes to allowing undocumented folks to drive, that there was any kind of magnet?
No, and in fact, what
Meaning
we
more
found...
people came there.
So there were states that were very lenient, right? Some states didn't require a whole lot in terms of evidence for them to prove identity or residence. Some states were much more strict, which really then prevented the whole reason why you would do this. You wouldn't gain the benefit of public safety and economic benefit to the state. And then other states were more moderate, like Connecticut, wherein the documentation that was being required to prove residency and to prove identity was documentation that may not have been easily obtained.
Your executive summary on this is they ain't
that,
going anywhere.
You know, there's 30,000 people that live in the state of Rhode Island. They're undocumented, they're here, they're not leaving. This is a public safety issue. This is about who is on the road, who is at the red light with you, right? Do you want the guy that's behind you to be paying attention? And if he's not paying attention, you want him at least to have insurance, and he can't do that without a driver's license. I also want to say Real ID Act allows for this to happen, allows for the state to issue these driver's licenses so long as the state posts something on there.
And it doesn't give them any other privileges.
It does not give them any other privilege at all.
Right. Come back when we have more debate. Thank you. Appreciate the work.
My pleasure.
All right, final word on this and more when we come back to this. I would just recommend you say to yourself slowly, they're not going anywhere, so what's best for us when it comes to this driver license issue? And I would doubt that we really do have good polling data based on informed citizens right now, but we'll see how that goes. Tomorrow night, the story of the Narragansett Indian tribe's internal conflict and the man who helped to settle them down and preclude any violence. We'll see you at 3 on WPRO tomorrow. Bye.